Hello, everybody. It's Andy Mack here, just bringing you an update in response to Pbeccas' question to the community regarding what rules and what board game and game you like the most within the last 10 years. Now, I thought, as you can see, I've I've scattered a number of, or most of my rules, or a lot of my rules on the table. Obviously, I'm getting on a bit, and what is important, I think, for people to understand is the frames of reference, how you make the choices around what is and isn't a good rule set. So I thought I'll just sort of take you on a bit of a journey with some of my past views and look at some of the rules. Now, it's only a very quick oversight according to me and my fading memory of the rules, so do pardon me for any obvious errors or misjudgments in terms of what the rules are about. So I was a teenager during the 80s, basically, and in that time, Dungeons and Dragons was probably the most revolutionary game for me, and also the advent of computing and computer games. But certainly Dungeons and Dragons was a huge influence to me, and then as part of that I was part of a role-playing group in my early to mid-teens, from school friends, and you know, over a number of years, 2 or 3 years. But obviously the memories of those times stuck with me quite profoundly, and I'm sure had quite an influence on my outlook. Back then, this rule set was a big influence to me. It was a sort of halfway house a bit. It was a skirmish game, which was, I think it was 1978. These rules were copyrighted, and David Cliff. Don't know much about the author or the writer, and but I did really enjoy the rules. They're very detailed in terms of skirmishing, and in those days, a lot of it was facts, figures, and charts. But what I liked about them is the level of detail it went into what sort of horse you have. Lots of details on weaponry you can choose. So, and I do think it had was influenced by the sort of Dungeons and Dragons culture, where people would decide to fight with a morning star or a mace or a pole axe, and you'd have your little retinue. There are some army lists in here, in fact, which, as a result of that, you would go and fight your battles. Now, they were quite slow because there was things like unhorsing, knocking people out. But in my memory at the time, with what our experiences of wargaming, it was quite gripping. And at school age, the sort of armor class, unprotected, so unarmored, protected, lightly armored, armored, heavily armored, plus an extra heavily armored. And then you have what sort of horses you have: courser, roni, nag. Shields, bucklers, medium shield, large shield, Pbeccas, early horse, late horse, and that's horse barding with reference to. The weapons you could have in your retinue could be a club, axe, short sword, mace, maul, warhammer, morningstar, ball and chain, spear, farm tool, sword, pole arms, Danish axe, two-handed sword, light lance, sling, javelin, crossbow, short bow, longbow, handgun, composite bow, and latch, and so on and so forth. And obviously armour had different armour classes and so forth, and what types of armour. So the sort of retinues you would have would be 11th century retinue list, which was lord, knights, mounted sergeants, foot sergeants. A 12th century one would be much the same: foot sergeants, lords, knights, but all with different types of armour classing according to the period. 13th century, 14th century retinue list, 15th century, and then you've got Vikings, Saxons, Normans, Turks, Crusaders, 100 Years' War English, 100-Year War French. So, and what my point is, it was a very self-contained rule set. It didn't cost much, and I think I picked this one up as a second copy that I've had back in the sort of, when would it be? In the 2000s and something, 2008, something like that. and just at a convention, bring and buy kind of thing. And but you know, there's £5-6 and you'd get your army lists. In this period too, Citadel would do a lot of ranges of figures, so like Vikings, Normans, of medieval period, and as I said, you could choose which one had what sort of weapons, so it made it quite fun. So that was a big influence on my skirmish gaming. So you could get bogged down with charts. I know nowadays people don't like charts and factors and so forth, but there were quite a few of them in this. But it was actually quite a simple game, and it was quite methodical in terms of you were able to learn them quite quick, and it was where you did have to work things out. It was at appropriate time, and it often made for quite a lot of humour because of, you know, whether you unhorsed someone as a result of your attack, or someone was knocked out, and then you had to protect them from the other marauding retinues. So it was a great influence on me. So that's Retinue, Medieval Skirmishals by David Cliff. So I don't think it was an international selling. It was by Tabletop Games. There we are, printed in England. It's got the sort of address of the publisher was on there. As I say, this is all quite a long time ago now. So, but it certainly was in existence in the 80s, and also I picked my copy up probably in around 2008 to 10, something like that. So that's Retinue, big influence on me. So as I said about the games that I'm influenced on, with reference to Dungeons and Dragons, there's also Call of Cthulhu. H.P. Lovecraft, who's the horror writer, American chap, and there's lots of literature on him, but there's also obviously the Call of Cthulhu games, quite well known. But what my point here is, in recent years, I've been buying, partly through nostalgia, the more up-to-date books from them. I generally only do it if it's a bargain, so because some of the prices are quite high for role-playing games and role-playing games booklets, but certainly Call of Cthulhu was an influence, and obviously Dungeons and Dragons as well. The problem with Dungeons and Dragons, the world they chose is the Forgotten Realms. Unfortunately, it's a bit too much magic in it for my liking. So although I did buy a lot of source material just for nostalgia, a lot of it really, I'm a bit put off if ever I were to decide to start role-playing again and play that actual game setting. So the first books in that sort of genre or game that I have been buying and that influenced me is the most recent Dungeons and Dragons. I also bought the 3.5 versions and all their booklets, again through nostalgia. But it's more recently, and in particular, Middle-earth. Now, I'm not sure whether it's going to be a great game setting, Middle-earth, as for a role-playing game, but I bought it because in the 80s, fantasy and Tolkien went hand in hand. A lot of the early Citadel Rangers were all figures who were very much based around the early versions of fantasy, as according to Tolkien. Also, there was a RuneQuest, and there's a few other well-known games of the time who had a big influence on figures. But certainly, so with reference to role-playing, there's a series out which is the most up-to-date Dungeons and Dragons series, which is the 5th edition. But they've been brought out a Q7 brought out range of Middle-earth specific amendments for the Dungeons and Dragons game system. So I haven't bought the whole range or anything, just a few, for nostalgia mainly. But if in retirement I want to throw together a bit of role playing, then it'd be quite fun perhaps to do a Middle-earth role playing game. So in the coming years, who knows? But I'm not role playing at the moment. But it's just saying that is the Dungeons and Dragons and 5th edition. Specifically, the Middle-earth amendment is something which is really I had to have, and I'm glad I've had it too. And it's nice leafing through these sort of supplements and so forth, because it also adds a bit to your knowledge of Middle-earth, which is, books I enjoyed in my teens, The Hobbit and Middle-earth, and I enjoyed the films as well, but I'm not a massive fan now. But I say periodically it's nice just to sit back and read some facts and figures about Middle-earth, which is a bit of escapism, really. So that's the role playing game there, Middle Earth. I thought I'd try that. As I said, in the 80s, also I bought the another Middle Earth role playing game, which we've got a few supplements and role playing books for. So that's the first one. That's my. I don't play many computer games, so there's one computer game slightly connected with my board game, which I'll come into. So that's instead of the computer game. Now it gets bit more complicated now. Now my wargaming influences was mainly WRG for quite some time, and even now it's kind of entrenched into me, I think. So that's the benchmark I place on games. In the main, there's been a few things which I'll come on to which have superseded the WRG. My WRG favoritism, if you like, but I will say that WRG rules are now being reprinted by John Curry in the most recent. It's 2005. So 2005. But I think I picked this one up in about 2017 as a print, or maybe not this one, but some of the other ones that John Curry's done have been printed more recently. But he started reprinting the WRG series. This is 6th edition, but it also adds an introduction to ancient wargaming. So it's got quite a nice retro and old style Phil Barker's details on ancient wargaming, which is a great purchase, because one thing I'll add is look at the amount of copy you get, and these books are always under £20, always under £20. So, and there's so much in them in terms of historical detail, wargaming mechanisms. There is something what they call Barker-esque, which is he writes in a way that some people find confusing, but I think if you take a step back from it and don't use it as a competition set of rules, then they're fine. And you do have to embrace again tables and charts a little bit, but nothing excessively so. You soon get the hang of the facts and figures. There's usually most of the games can be played, albeit perhaps slowly the first few times, but with the quick reference sheets. So here's a sort of list of the quick reference sheets at the back here, like weapons factors. So all you do is what armor class you're fighting, lance, and it gives you a factor. And you just, I it's been a while since I played the 6th edition, but certainly you have various tables which you run your total of your factors down versus number of figures shooting or fighting, and it gives you a casualty, and you might roll a dice which will put you up or down on the various factor scales. But yeah, so the WRG was a huge influence on me, and obviously what that is army scales, usually around about scale of 50 to 1, something like that. The Renaissance rules that I'm was highly influenced in was George Gush. George Gush. These rules are probably one of my favourite all-time rules. I've got a more up-to-date copy of them because, again, there's been a reprint, so I'll just try and find them. Where are we? They should be here because they're important. They are important for me. Well, they're not readily to hand, unfortunately. Here we are. So, George Gush. The George Gush rules are 1420 to 1700s again, sort of around about the late 70s, but they were used right throughout the 80s, and I do believe some people still think they're great now. The figure scales around about for 15, or you can play 28s or 15 mil. I don't know if you can go smaller than that, perhaps, but 40 with 1/300 scale figures. So 1 foot mounted figure on the table represents 20 real men. I think it's a great set of rules. There's not many factors involved in this one, but you have a lot of it. And I played this set of rules, probably one of the most I've played of all the rules I've wargamed, and they just feel right with the armies that you face. Like I would play with a royalist army. The cavalry were would behave in a way that you would expect them to. The royalist A-class cavalry, fanatics or whatever. Um, and it's just a good set of rules. And what I like too is buildings were buildings, so you wouldn't have a sort of template. You would have a building, and you'd put a certain amount of men inside, so you could have a certain amount of men fighting. There's siege rules in here too. Things with reference to shooting over ramparts, pushing scaling ladders down. There's all sorts of things, using pits, pots, use of axes, scaling ladders, elephants. Construction of siege engines, heavy rams, 6 ladders, penthouses. A lot of it would be costs as well, so it's all costed. So your armies you would choose. The army lists that they would have would be, this is the George Gush army list. The armies that you would choose would have all points values, and you would just work out what you wanted. Basically, there was some restrictions down the columns of what you can and can't have, but you work out what you wanted, and then we'll see that whatever costing. If you're playing a campaign, then it makes it quite fun because you don't want to waste troops, and you can quite easily convert loot and things to more points that you could use for your armies and replenishing troops and so forth. So that's George Gush. For this isn't one these aren't this one isn't one of the ones I'm putting forward as my highest influence games, but it's a great game and it's one of my high influences. So and I'll come into why I'm mentioning all this a bit later. Now the other big influences, again moving on with the WRG, was the DBM, where it went on. This became where one of the advents. So this brought in with there was a number of other games which I'll mention shortly, but DBM it went on to more of a element-based game. So you wouldn't actually remove single figures. It was elements, and it also was one of a number of rule sets which started using a sort of pip system or chip system of command and control, whereas before you would have factors that would certain troop morale class would have factors, and as a result of a fight there might be certain outcomes that might happen, and it could be you do a morale test before you charge, and that causes you to go what's the word now, can't think of the word, but fanatically forward, but you charge with impetus, but it's when you kind of charge without control, a bit like they did the British cavalry did at Waterloo, where they overran and blew their horses and then got caught by the lancers. So it's that sort of thing where you'd roll and it might have a certain outcome in terms of, and a lot of these rules were morale focused, where depending on morale and then outcome of the skirmish, certain outcomes would happen. With this, a lot of it was more command and control based. So you'd have a certain amount of pips, and you would decide various ways you'd get your pips. You'd roll a dice, you get a certain amount of pips, and you could use your pips in certain ways of command and control. I won't go into detail, but that's DBM, and again, these were quite competition games. Again, it was done by Barker, so there's a lot of Barker-esque in there, but there's a huge lot of detail, and what I liked about them is that you would pay £5 or £6, and you'd get. This is the original set, DBM. DBM is the original. DBMM is the more up to date version. So DBM was the original, but it's a great set of rules, and you had all these army lists, and the army lists were matter of fact. There's detail about the army, a little splurge about them, and that's it. So you weren't paying for lots of photography and things like that. So which is interesting, because in those days painting your army you had to do quite a lot of research, or you just use a bit of license really to to paint how you felt the army ought to look. Romans being red and sort of that sort of thing, and but it would involve you going to the library, getting books out, and looking at artwork and so forth. And so that was quite an interesting period. Whereas nowadays, obviously, a lot of rules have got painting guides with them, and whether that loses something, I don't know, making it so easy. But you have the internet as well, obviously. But yeah, there was a huge amount of DBM stuff. So you got the medieval period, you got the early sort of Egyptian periods and so forth, and early medieval there as well. So DBM was a big influence on me. Moving on now, this is where it starts getting tricky. A big revolutionary rule set was, of course, War Master, and what this brought in was the initiative, very much a leadership thing. So if you had a certain leaders of certain quality, and you'd have your leadership would have to be within a certain area, and depending on how good your leader was, it would give you a number of options in terms of initiative, I believe. So I might be slightly wrong in this, but Rick Priestley, it's a great rule set in terms of cutting new ground in wargaming. He also brought out so that's the Fantasy Warhammer, which was the first set of rules, which was sort of geared towards, I think it's 10 mil, the figures were. And then, but the command and control was very, Rick Priestley's involved in quite a lot of innovative games. He's from sort of the Games Workshop stable originally, I think. So he's with Ali Morrison and the Perry twins. So I'm pretty certain I'm right in that sort of Nottingham powerhouse of wargaming area, certainly at one point in time. Yeah, so great set of rules in terms of their command and control. You have to look it up, really, I'd say, but it was, as I remember, that this was quite a watershed. Now, he also brought out his War Master Ancients and the Ancient Islanders, but one of the changes, obviously, with the influence from the Games Workshop and the Games Workshop Warhammer Historical, it starts bringing in colour photographs, which probably opens the audience a bit, but it has drastically changed what is a set of rules. So if you can imagine coming from the sort of Pbeccas period of lots of writing to, sorry, I'm doing a lot of this page turning off camera, to a very colourful and sort of almost flow diagram style wargaming, where each step is you're nurtured through. Then it's changed quite a lot, but some ways for the better, no doubt. So I've already mentioned about my role-playing game. Now my second quandary was bolt action. Bolt action I play with a number of people down at a club, which very kindly I get invited along to. Because of the nature of my work and family circumstances, I haven't been able to go as much as I'd like, and in more recent months it's been quite difficult finding time because of my shift pattern and so forth from work. But I'm certainly always well wishing when they do games. VK lent me this book. This is the first Bolt Action, but it was just giving me a taster of it, and I've had some great games of Bolt Action. Fun games. One of the why I'm not choosing Bolt Action as one of my top 3 games is because of the dice. Now it makes for a fun game, and I really enjoy it. But what I do find I do is it's a bit like you hear about card counters in a gambling game, working out when the cards are played, what other cards are likely to come up. Well, I find when you're playing with 2 or 3 or 4 of you, you lose playing the actual game to some extent, but you work your game around how the dice come out in sequences. So if your opposition goes next, or is his dice comes out first, or a sequence of his dice comes out, then you alter your tactics. Now it makes for a fun game because it ebbs and flows, and you sort of you make your plan and then it all goes belly up because of the way that the dice come out. But it does mean that I'm not really focused on things like the terrain so much, or I'm thinking of opportunities that might present through the dice as opposed to playing a game. I know it's just me. I can't knock it. It's a great game and it's a well presented. I think it's been slightly lucky because it's coincided with a great figure revolution in terms of 28mm World War II. You've got this Sarissa buildings. You've got a lot of investment into the bolt action genre, if you like. You got the right across the board from the I can't remember the name of the company. The Warlords, they've really done an excellent job in terms of marketing this product, and it is a good game, and I've really, as a group game, it's certainly one of my favourites. It's a sort of beer and pretzels, I would say. It's exactly what you'd want in an afternoon war game, really, in terms of having fun. But it's not my number one set of rules in terms of war games. Much I laboured over should it be, and I know a lot of people have chosen it, but it's not for me in terms of number one. But it is a great set of rules. I know there's a version 2 now, and that's what we play at the club. But this was version 1, so it gave me a kind of insight into the game and whet my appetite. Which I do have a British Army, so it's not that I'm not saying it's a bad game. It's an excellent set of game rules, but it's not my number one. So that's bolt action. Now, again, here's more Barker-esque stuff. You may know that I do Napoleonics. Well, I'm doing my games for horse and musket rules, so 1685 to 1845, exactly in the stable of the War Games Research Group. This, as I say, it's edited by John Curry more recently, 1979, so it's a little bit more. It's bigger print, which is probably testament to its to the eyesight of all of us who would likely to pick up the rules these days. But yeah, it's that's the rules I use for my Napoleonics. I won't get into detail. Well, maybe I'll do it on a separate occasion when I finally present my recent core of Bavarians to you all. But that's Phil Barker's horse and musket rules, which I do play for my Napoleonics. Other influences: American Civil War, Fire and Fury. I think these are still reprinted. Certainly, I think I got this from Cavalier Books in the UK. I think it's not as glossy as it used to be, but certainly you can still pick them up. And excellent set of rules. I mean, it's been going for years, way before the 10-year benchmark here, but it's certainly been a huge influence on me. It's the detail I like. So it's got lots of detail. It's presented in a kind of I don't know, just you get the way the rules are presented. It's as if you are building your army to fight, and sort of the logistic side of it. And I don't know, it just got that right feel for me. It's not too glossy. It's got a lot of information. This rules, I think, mainly depending on the status of your troops, they're either disordered or in good order. And if they're disordered, then they go to a certain chart for what manoeuvres they can throw. Again, it is. I think you do have your leaders nearby to get bonuses or for your modifiers and so forth. But it's again chart driven, but excellent set of rules for American Civil War. And I've also bought the Age of Eagles. I think it's brigade size. So I will try Age of Eagles because it has lots of bonus, good stuff about it. But I actually like my Napoleonics at battalion level. But it's the scale I like. It's kind of near the scale I like, yeah, it's no doubt. I haven't played Age of Eagles yet, but I've certainly played Fire and Fury a number of times, and it's great. Here's an example of how good old War Games research booklets used to come out, and this is Unit Organizations American Civil War, exactly what you want, really, by Richard J. Zimmerman. It's a great book. Just tells you very specifically what the formations are for each particular army in each whatever theatre of war. Union Army tells you the numbers, a little bit spiel about them, but for wargaming it's perfect, and certainly for Fire and Fury, I found that a great help. Now, I haven't got a Fire and Fury army. It's something I don't know why I haven't. I had a friend who had lots of figures, and when I've wargamed it, I've used his. but it's something we'll probably do at some point. 15 mils where I'm at in the main for my personal wargaming. Now here we come. I'm going to move swiftly now, if I can. So we're getting close now to the second one. Now when I looked at bolt action, one of my big influences, again in the I think 2000, around about then, was a real golden age of wargaming, because you started getting the command and control. New command, yeah, it was a great period for wargaming about 2000. I started in the 80s, and it was very much the DBM stuff. Sorry, not DBM, the Wargames Research Group, but 2000s was seemed to be a really good period of wargaming, I think. At Close Quarters by Chris Pear's excellent set of rules for skirmishing. It's got quite a broad area, covers for 20th to earlier 21st century special forces operations and other small unit actions. It can get quite big, this, but it is what I liked about it. It's very much focused on the ability of the unit you've got. So there are a few caveats, but there is, so if you are a elite unit, then you're going to have a lot more opportunity. It's common sense really, but elite units have a lot more better resilience, better all round really, initiative, and it's just a great set of rules. I get confused with but it was very much on the quality of the unit as opposed to any specific leader or anything like that. I did have something specific to say about this. The types of movement you'd have would be stealthy movement, manoeuvre movement, rush movement, and assault movement. Figures on foot have a choice of 4 kinds of movement. We refer to these as stealthy, as we said. Normally, and it's all d6. Yeah, just one d6 or. So my angle of camera work is pretty poor. But it was an excellent set of rules. So if you pick it up, if you can get it on a bargain or second hand, I'd certainly recommend it, because it was a great set of rules. I've played loads of small games of this. It covers World War II. You know, it's pretty comprehensive. All the weapons type you get, everything: pistols, submachine guns, squad automatic rifles, magazine-fed LMG, anti-tank rifles, hand grenades, hand grenade offensive, defensive grenades, rifle grenades, auto grenade launcher, anti-tank hand grenade, tripod mounting MNG, belt-fed GPMG, magazine-fed LMG, handheld anti-tank launcher, light anti-tank missile, light mortar, man-pack flamethrower. So yeah, it was quite a simple game, but it was good. I really enjoyed it.